A hot headline right now in the United States is the group called Antifa. The president recently declared this group as domestic terrorists. But what are their origins? And how has this group evolved nowadays as compared to when it was formed? This video will look at this, and see the correlations to modern Antifa groups in the United States. I want to make clear that just by doing this video it does not mean I support this, but I believe knowledge is key to understanding a group, its tactics, and its mission. The purpose is to inform people and make them aware of any dangers that may affect their lives. My entire channel is based on information and history. My goal is to bring knowledge. Thank you. The story of anti-fascism begins in Europe. It did not appear overnight. It grew from the troubled years after World War I. Europe was a continent of great change and great fear. Many countries faced economic problems and political instability. In this chaotic environment, new and dangerous ideas began to take hold. Fascism, with its promise of national rebirth and its hatred of democracy, emerged as a powerful force. This new threat did not go unchallenged. People from many different backgrounds saw the danger that fascism posed to their freedom and their very lives. They knew they had to stand up against it. This was the beginning of the anti-fascist or Antifa movement. This early resistance was born in the streets of Italy. Benito Mussolini and his black shirts were gaining power in the early 1920s. They used violence and intimidation to crush their opponents and seize control. In response, a coalition of workers, socialists, anarchists, and communists formed militant groups to fight back. They called themselves the Arditi del Popolo, or the People's Daring Ones. They engaged in direct confrontations with the fascist squads. It had to be physically stopped before it could grow strong enough to take over the state, a lesson learned through bitter experience. It is a common mistake to say that anti-fascism is simply communism. It does have communist roots, but rather than being a government system, it is more of an ideology. The history is much more complex. While communists were among the first and most dedicated anti-fascists, the movement was always broader. It was a popular front, a coalition of different political beliefs. Anarchists, socialists, and social democrats, almost exclusively liberals, but even sometimes conservatives joined. They may have disagreed on what the ideal future should look like. However, they all agreed that a fascist future was unacceptable for everyone. The influence of anarchism has been profoundly important. Anarchists oppose hierarchy and oppose state control, making fascism their natural enemy. They champion direct action and decentralized organization. Social democrats and liberals also played a crucial role. In Germany, the Social Democratic Party, or SPD, formed the Iron Front, a paramilitary group to defend the Weimar Republic. They valued democracy and a broad-based struggle for a world free from the tyranny of fascism. Anti-fascist tactics have always been diverse, but they are rooted in a core principle: stopping fascism before it can grow. This means not allowing fascists to spread their message or organize in public. One of the primary tactics is the mass protest and counter-demonstration. When fascists announce a march or a rally, anti-fascists organize a larger presence to oppose them. The goal is to show the fascists that they are not welcome, and that their ideology is rejected by the community. This can involve chanting slogans, holding banners, and outnumbering them to make their event fail. Another key tactic is direct action, physically blocking a fascist march from proceeding, creating a wall of sound with drums and noisemakers to drown out speakers. In some cases, it has involved physical confrontations to defend communities from fascist violence. Intelligence gathering is also a crucial, though less visible, part of anti-fascist work. This involves researching and identifying local fascist organizers, track their organizations, and share information to expose their plans. Finally, community outreach and education are fundamental tactics. This involves organizing educational events and building broad coalitions with other community groups. The ultimate victory is not just defeating fascists in the street, but creating a society where they can find no supporters. The Battle of Cable Street is one of the most important events in the history of anti-fascism. It took place on October 4, 1936, in the East End of London. At the time, this area was home to a large Jewish population, many Irish, and other working-class immigrants. Sir Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists, known as the Blackshirts, planned to march directly through the heart of this community. Their intent was clear: to intimidate the Jewish residents and spread their message of anti-Semitic hate. The residents decided they would not let the fascists pass. A massive mobilization began. Jewish groups, Irish dock workers, communists and socialists, trade unionists, joined local residents. The slogan for the day became famous: "They shall not pass." The government tried to ensure the march would go ahead, deploying thousands of police officers to clear the way. On the day, the streets were filled with people. Over 100,000 anti-fascist protesters gathered. They built barricades out of overturned furniture, timber. The police attempted to force a path through, leading to fierce clashes with protesters. The community turned the streets into a fortress. The Battle of Cable Street was a huge event in the anti-fascist movement. It showed that when a community unites, it can stand up to fascism. But it also shows the dangers that arise when two groups clash. After the defeat of the Axis powers in World War II, many people believed fascism was gone for good. The horror of the Holocaust and the devastation of the war seemed to have, discredited the ideology completely. However, fascist and neo-Nazi groups did not disappear. They went underground, regrouped, and slowly began to re-emerge in the decades that followed. In response, anti-fascist organizing had to adapt. The fight was no longer against powerful parties threatening to take state power, but against smaller, more scattered groups of violent extremists. In the United Kingdom, the post-war period saw the arrival of many immigrants from Commonwealth countries. This led to a racist backlash and the rise of fascist groups like the National Front in the 1970s. These groups held provocative marches through immigrant neighborhoods and carried out racist attacks. In response, groups like the Anti-Nazi League, or ANL, were formed. The ANL brought together a broad coalition of socialists, liberals, and community activists. They organized large counter-demonstrations and cultural events, most famously the Rock Against Racism concerts, which used music to promote a message of unity and anti-racism to young people across the country. Meanwhile, other European countries faced their own struggles with the far right, against those who would seek to destroy it. In West Germany during the 1980s, a new and influential form of anti-fascism emerged from the squatter and countercultural scenes. This was the autonom movement. The autonom or autonomists were radical leftists, mostly anarchists and libertarian communists. They were deeply skeptical of the state and all formal political parties. They believed the German state had not done enough to purge its Nazi past. They saw former Nazis in positions of power and thought official remembrance was hollow. For them, anti-fascism had to be an autonomous struggle, waged from below, without relying on authorities. The autonomen developed a distinct style and tactics that influenced anti-fascists globally. They adopted the black bloc tactic. Protesters dressed in all-black clothing and wore masks. This made identification by police difficult and fostered unity and collective power. After the fall of the Berlin Wall and reunification in 1990, a wave of racist and neo-Nazi violence swept the former East. Asylum seeker hostels were firebombed, immigrants were attacked and killed. The state response seemed slow and ineffective. This crisis energized the autonomen and other groups, known as Antifa. They took it upon themselves to defend refugees and confront neo-Nazis directly. Carried by activists inspired by the autonomen's determined and uncompromising struggle against the resurgent far right. Anti-fascist ideas and actions have a history in the United States, even if they were not always called Antifa. In the 1930s, as fascism rose in Europe, American groups organized in opposition. The German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi organization, held rallies and ran summer camps in the U.S. They were met with resistance from a coalition of Jewish veterans, trade unionists, left-wing activists. In 1939, the Bund held a massive rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Thousands of protesters gathered outside. They clashed with police as they tried to disrupt the event. This was an early American expression of direct anti-fascist opposition. After World War II, the fight in the U.S. shifted to opposing homegrown white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s was, in many ways, an anti-fascist struggle. Activists faced terror and violence from the KKK and other racist groups determined to maintain white supremacy. While the movement's leaders often advocated nonviolence, groups like the Deacons for Defense and Justice provided armed self-defense for civil rights workers. They understood that in the face of violent racism, communities sometimes had to be prepared to defend themselves physically. The term Antifa, and the specific style of organizing associated with it, did not become common in the United States until much later. The influence came primarily from the European movements of the 1980s and 90s. American activists traveling in Europe, particularly in Germany, saw autonom and Antifa groups in action. They were inspired by militant tactics, black bloc-style philosophy of autonomous community-based self-defense. They brought these ideas and strategies back to the United States, adapting them to the American context. This new wave of anti-fascism began to take shape in the American punk subculture and skinhead subculture of the late 1980s. The most important forerunner to modern Antifa in the United States was Anti-Racist Action, or ARA. The group was founded in Minneapolis in the late 1980s by a group of anti-racist skinheads and punk rockers. The ARA adopted a set of clear principles, the most famous of which was, "We go where they go." This meant that whenever white supremacists tried to hold a rally, a concert or a meeting, ARA would be there to confront them directly. ARA quickly grew from a local crew into a continent-wide network. Chapters sprung up in cities across the United States and Canada. The network was decentralized, with each local chapter operating autonomously, but they were all united by 4 key points of unity. These points included a commitment to destroying racism, sexism, and homophobia, and a belief in using direct action. They did not rely on the police or the state to solve the problem of white supremacy. Instead, they focused on building a grassroots movement that could defend its own communities through direct confrontation and solidarity. The tactics of ARA were a direct precursor to those used by Antifa today. They organized counter-demonstrations to shut down KKK rallies. They physically removed neo-Nazi bands from playing at punk rock venues. They gathered intelligence on white supremacist organizers and exposed them to their communities. And they engaged in physical self-defense when confronted with fascist violence. Their work was often dangerous, but they succeeded in disrupting and dismantling numerous white supremacist groups throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. The ARA network laid the groundwork for the Antifa groups that emerged in the 21st century. Many of the people involved in ARA went on to form or join the new wave of anti-fascist groups that became more visible after 2016. They brought with them decades of experience in organizing, intelligence gathering, and direct action. The legacy of anti-racist action is the creation of a durable, militant anti-fascist tradition in North America. A lesson that modern Antifa continues to put into practice. There will always be disagreement between groups of people, and often these events will lead to violence. It seems like the days of peaceful protesting are long gone. I thank you for watching, and I encourage you to check out some of my other videos. Thanks for your support. And as always, stay informed.